Okay, so now let's look at the last type that we have is that fiber reinforced polymer rebars. So when we say fiber reinforced polymer rebars, this basically represents the non-metallic type of reinforcement. Okay. Yeah. So this is typically used when we have corrosion issues significantly. So where you when you use the normal steel rebars and when you expect that to corrode, that time this type of rebars will be helpful to sustain the environment for longer duration. So typically the glass and basalt fibers are in use. Other than this, you have CFRP, carbon fiber reinforced polymers, right? So the most commonly used type is that glass, and now these type of FRP rebars are uh, becoming more common in our construction practices. So how do you prepare this type of FRP rebars? You have your fibers. So this basically indicates your fibers, and then you have polymer matrix, and this will be embedded into this to get the FRP composite. So basically, when you have FRP composite, that basically is a combination of fibers embedded in the polymer matrix. So why do we use such FRP rebars? As I already told, so since these are like non-metallic type, this provides better corrosion resistance, right? And other than that, these type of GFRP bars or no less weight compared to your steel reinforcement. So when you use such type of FRP bars, you can reduce the dead load of your structure. So you can reduce the weight of the structure. So especially when you use GFRP rebars, so the weight will be almost one fourth of what you obtained using steel reinforcement. And you have several advantages of customizing these type of FRP rebars. This can be manufactured in custom lengths, and you can bend this, or you can obtain any shape that you want for your application. So these are some of the advantages of using FRP rebars as reinforcement. So when you look at the property of FRP rebars, these are generally non-conductive to electricity and heat. So in that case, this will be a better option. You can use this reinforcement when you need to construct power generation plants and other specialized installations where you expect the thermal conductivity on the heat, it really becomes a challenging part. So in such cases, when you use fiber reinforced polymers, then it provides better comfort, and it helps you to obtain the accurate performance because these are non-conductive to electricity and heat. But when you compare with the steel, this basically, uh, 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 brittle in nature, so it not fail in a ductile manner as your steel rebar. So when you have such FRP rebars, these will fail in a brittle manner. And so you have to take a good while designing itself, when you are using FRP rebar, you have to limit the loads such a way that it is in its yield limit. So it should not go beyond yield, because when it goes beyond yield, it will induce permanent deformation and then will lead to brittle failure. So we need to avoid such type of brittle failure. So while designing itself, you have to ensure that the design is under yield condition within the yield limit. And as I mentioned, these are non-metallic, so you will not face any metallic corrosion. So again here, you have to note, when you say or when you define corrosion, it basically represents, the potential variation, and then because of that you will observe a lot of electrons and ion transfer from one place to the other place, especially the corroding place, which is the anode, and to the cathode. But if you generalize the corrosion term as the cross-sectional loss or reduction in area, Then you have to look the other issue is that chemical attack. When you generalize the corrosion term as the cross-sectional loss, then you may observe such type of cross-sectional loss using FRP rebars also, though it is non-metallic. Why so? When it is exposed to the environment like a highly alkaline environment, so these are polymer based, they tend to degrade. So when the polymer based rebars degrade, you will see reduction in its area. So in that case, you know you should not get confused that with corrosion. So when you just look at the metallic corrosion, so where we have this anode cathodic spots by electron and ionic transfer, so there in that environment it will provide a better resistance as it is non-metallic. But when you look at the chemical attack, especially the regions or the environment where you have highly alkaline scenario, so in such cases this will not perform well. Why? Because the resins or the polymers that is there in your FRP composite, they tend to degrade, and that is going to reduce the performance. So you need to, while selecting this type of fibers for the application, you need to know whether the fiber that is going to be used is alkali resistant or not. So if your fibers are alkali resistant, then you can use it in a concrete environment where pH value is in the range of about 13. Okay, so if not, the GFRP rebars that you'll be using, if those are not alkali resistant, then that cannot withstand the high alkaline environment in the concrete. So that is why it is very important to know whether the rebar that you are using is alkali resistant or not. So this comes under the negative part. So these basically represents the advantage of your rebar, and then these brittleness, and then this chemical attack that basically represents the disadvantage of your rebar. But you can account this disadvantage by taking care of this design stage, where you, when you limit the failure within the yield limit, then you can go with this. And when you check your fibers are alkali resistant, then there will not be any issue to use this type of GFRP bars in a highly alkaline environment in concrete. Then the other point that to note here is that quality of matrix. So as I already mentioned, so these fibers are bound together with help of resin. So in such cases, the uniformity of the epoxy resin plays a major role. So if your manufacturing process is not adequate, then you may observe such type of resin accumulation at the bottom. Here this regions basically indicates how your epoxy got collected at the bottom due to the overflowing of uncured epoxy resin. So when you embed this fibers in epoxy resin, you give some time for its setting, right? So while giving such time, you should ensure that the epoxy will adhere to the surface uniformly. If it is not done properly, and if your epoxy is overflowing on the surface, that will get accumulated at the bottom of your rebar, and you will you will observe such type of accumulation here. So a layer of resin that protects the fiber is present on the most of the surface of the bars and is more prevalent on the sides. This occurs because the uncured resin made by pultrusion flows downward due to the gravity before entering the heated die and setting. So as such, portions of the bar where the glass fibers are exposed, they can be found. Okay, so in such cases, this becomes your weak region, and some of the glass fibers may get exposed because that as your epoxy is not adhered to the surface. So why this is happening? When you have such overflowing, or when the epoxy is not cured properly. Curing basically here it indicates setting of your epoxy on the fibers. If it is not set properly, then that will overflow, and flow due to gravity, and that will get accumulated at the bottom. So this is going to be your weak link, and if the fibers are exposed in such cases, then that will get degrade at the earliest. So you need to avoid such type of degradation. So you have to do a proper quality check for selecting your rebar. And here you can see some micrographs which shows the interfaces, FRP interface, and the cross section of the rebar that you are going to use. You can see the type of resin used here, and then the glass fiber, and here you have the surface of the bar. So this basically indicates, so in the concrete region, when you have FRP rebar composite, right? So if it is not done properly, if your resin is not uniform, then you may see that is not bonded well with your fibers, and there will be some gap between the fiber and the resin, and which may lead to fiber exposure over a period. And here you can see the cross section of the fiber alone, where you have resin, and then you have the glass fibers embedded in it. And if the resin is not set or cured properly, you may have some voids on the matrix. So that is what shown here. So there could be some voids on it, and these will become, you know um, critical for your fiber performance. So the thickness of the resin around the circumference was not uniform here in this case, and to ensure a good protection for your fibers, it has to be done uniformly. So the uniform resin matrix should be done, and it is essential to cover well all the surface of your glass fibers. And typically when we have steel rebars, what are the different types of failure mode that we expect? Okay, so here I am showing you the failure modes of FRP rebar. So which could be due to debonding and shear rupture of the matrix. So that means I was telling you that FRP rebars are there, and that is the FRP composite, that is basically a composite of FRP fibers and resins. So if the bonding is not proper between the fiber and resin, then you may observe such type of debonding. And if you have such type of debonding, and while under, so like when the rebar is under loading condition, that may have such type of shear rupture. So here you are basically saying like the fibers have, some of the fibers have come out of the rebar. So this basically represents the debonding of your FRP bars, and you here also the same case. So this has come out, and you can see some cracking on the surface, and this eventually led to shearing of your FRP rebar, basically the matrix and the glass fibers. And this basically represents the pure shear failure, and because of that you have strand rupture, fiber rupture. Okay, so I'm just asking you in general, like what are the different types of failure mode that you can expect for steel reinforcement? So what are the different failure modes that you know for steel reinforcement, steel rebar? How does your rebar fails in the tension test?
Cup and cone failure.
Cup and cone failure. Yeah, good. So that is a pure ductile failure, right? When you have cup and cone failure, that basically pure ductile failure. Right? And then the second mode could be
Flexural failure.
yeah, flexural failure in the sense, when your rebar is under flexural loading condition, so that is going to induce tension only. So the steel will fail under tension. Now, basically, when you have flexural loading, so you are indirectly inducing the tension in the rebar, right? So I'm just asking about the mode of failures. So one is cup cone failure. That means when the tension is acting on your rebar. So for example, consider this is your rebar and the tension is acting on your rebar. So because of the tension force here, the region which is weak region, that become, the cross section in that region gets reduced, right? And I'm just drawing this particular region which is going to fail. So in that case, there you can see the reduction in the, I'm just drawing the schematic. So you reduction in cross sectional area, and that your the failure will be something like this cup cone failure due to the tension force, right? So this is under pure tension, or what do you say, pure ductile failure. And other than this, if there is any stress concentration, and that may lead to shear failure. So your failure plane will be something like this. And then the third failure is that
Torsion failure.
okay, so torsion is type of loading that you are going to apply. Okay, so
Yes,
under
ma'am. So
that
then
loading, it will
torsion,
fail. It is called torsional failure. What? Sorry?
like torsional load will be causing shear failure.
Yeah, that could cause shear failure. Yeah, exactly. I'm talking
Ma'am,
about here the mode of failure in general.
failure.
Sorry?
Buckling. Does it come under a failure category?
I'm talking about mode of failure. So that those whatever that you have mentioned, those comes in that failure category. But how it is failing? So the mode of failure is different. So the mode of failure, it could be ductile failure. So as in the case, as in steel rebars, it could be cup cone failure. And for other type of rebar, again, so as the strength increases, the ductility reduces and brittleness increases. So in such cases, you will be observing a lot of shear failure than the ductile failure, or the combination of ductile and shear failure. So what I mentioned here for FRP rebars, how this failure mode would be. I have just mentioned in the previous slide, right? What is the failure mode of FRP rebars?
Ma'am, when you bond,
Shear
Shear failure, okay. Compared to steel, what is the nature of FRP rebar?
ma'am, it will be brittle
Yeah, exactly. Brittle. So that is the other mode that I just expected you to say. So it's brittle failure, brittle mode. So one is this cup cone failure pattern. So basically we can say these are like failure pattern in general, failure modes or failure pattern. So that is cup cone failure mode. This is under pure ductile failure, and then the shear failure, and you have brittle failure. So when you have brittle failure, the plane will be sh- failure plane will be flat. There will not be any deformation. So the rebar will be failed in the this manner. So you'll just see a flat surface, exact cut surface. of Your one single rebar will become into two portions with a flat surface. Whereas when you have ductile failure, it will be a cup cone failure, cup cone like the failure mode will be in the cup cone shape, and when you have shear failure, there will be deformation, but the failure plane will be at about 45-degree angle. So you will see such inclination, and then the rebar gets into two pieces. So it gets ruptured into two pieces. So whereas when we talk about this FRP rebars, here shear and brittle plays a major role. So you observe lot of shear and brittle failures. So when the bond resin is not adequate or it is done poorly, then you observe such type of debonded matrix, or you can see lot of fibers coming out from the FRP composites as it is not able to taking the load. So in such cases, you will be observing debonding and shear failure of the matrix and glass fibers. So if the matrix is good, that is if your resin matrix is good, resin and fiber matrix is good under the load, then you observe such type of shear failure, and after a certain loading point, it cannot take further load, so your fiber gets ruptured into pieces. Right. So the only concern that we have with FRP rebar is that its performance in the alkaline environment. That is basically effect of pH could affect the properties of your FRP rebar. So especially when we say properties, it mainly affects the shear modulus of your FRP rebar. Right. So just to have a sense how this pH plays a role in affecting the performance of FRP rebar. Here you can see different types of FRP rebar is exposed to different pH level conditions. So this is here you have three types of FRP rebar exposed at so the bar P basically represents 51 weeks, and bar this one, the gray one, indicates this bar V1 type, and then this checked box basically indicates bar V2 type. All these things basically indicates the exposure duration. And when you have unexposed FRP rebar, the modulus of shear modulus of elasticity is uniform for all the cases. But when the pH value changes and when the exposure duration changes, then you can see a change in your shear modulus of elasticity. So if the pH value is less, this bar V2 type shows the higher shear modulus of elasticity. If as the pH value increases, you see the reduction in the shear modulus of elasticity is in this case. So you see the drastic reduction in the shear modulus of elasticity when you increase the exposure, as well as when you increase the pH value. So this basically indicates, you have to choose an FRP rebar which can sustain the highly alkaline environment. If it is not able to sustain the high alkaline environment, then the shear modulus of elasticity would be drastically reduced. And if that got reduced, your structure becomes less stiffer. So to have a better stiffness, you need to select fibers that are stable in highly alkaline environment. So that's a point here to understand. And now to summarize things, there's a cost comparison of various rebars that we use in our construction practices. So right from conventional uncoated TMT rebars, corrosion resistant steel, cement polymer composite coated steel, fusion bonded epoxy coated steel, galvanized and FRP rebars, and solid stainless steel. So you can see, the cost increases as the property is modified based on our requirement, right? So when you need to, so the purpose of using these steel rebars or different types of rebar is to enhance the overall performance of your structure, to achieve the durability, and hence to achieve the serviceability of your structure. So most cases, the main issue that we face with steel rebar is that corrosion. So we choose rebars which are highly corrosive, corrosion resistance in such cases. So when we compare the cost of such type of rebars which provide better corrosion, the cost is increased significantly compared to the conventional steel rebars that we use without any coating. So in such cases, you can see the cost of galvanized steel is almost twice the cost of TMT rebar, and then the cost of fiber reinforced polymers or size of TMT rebars, and solid stainless steel is too costly. So it's about 6 to 7 times your TMT steel rebar. So that is why it is important to depending on the type of structure, and then the cost involved, you can choose any one of these type of rebars which provides better corrosion resistance. So that is why the use of stainless steel is not that common in practice, and FRP rebars are nowadays it's more common in practice depending on the structure where you expect corrosion to be significant, and then you need to do a proper check to ensure that the polymers will not degrade over the time in the alkaline environment, and you do proper protection for such type of degradation. Else, it is always better to go with galvanized steel rebars, as the cost is also not that high. And as I already mentioned, you can have an option to go with coated rebars, but the thing is you have to ensure the coating is done properly. If the coating is not done, then it is better not to use the poorly coated rebars, and you can just go with uncoated conventional TMT rebar itself. So it's important to look at the life cycle cost of your structure than looking at the capital cost. Okay, so that is what here it is mentioned. In addition to the capital cost, the durability and life cycle cost must be considered while making your material choices. Fine. I'll just touch up this, the last part of this module, that is corrosion in pre-stressed concrete. So far, we have discussed in detail about corrosions and what are the different types of corrosion we can anticipate in a reinforced concrete structure based on its environmental condition, and what are the different types of steel reinforcement that we can use, what is the advantages and disadvantages associated with those types of steel rebars, right? So now let us look at the corrosion in pre-stressed concrete. So how different is this from the the conventional reinforced concrete that we have discussed so far? So first, let us look at why it is important to consider the pre-stressed concrete and the significance behind that. So perception of good performance, I hope you all are aware of pre-stressed concrete. So we generally, for a large infrastructure project, we prefer using pre-stressed concrete over the conventional reinforced concrete, owing to its a lot of advantages, especially the design advantages. You can have thinner member, and you can reduce the dead load, and yeah, you can have a a longer span structure compared to your conventional reinforced concrete. But these type of structures become more significant in the late 90s. So you can see this diagram, this graph here. This basically shows the number of segmental bridges constructed in the USA over the decade. So the number got increased beyond 1980s, and it becomes significant in 2000. So almost all the type of bridges that we construct in recent times are based on pre-stressed concrete structures. So when we have such advanced structures now in recent times, so these are like relatively younger than the structures that you have, the large infrastructures that you have using conventional reinforced concrete structures. When you use conventional reinforced concrete structures, you might have seen the old structures which are 1500 years old. You might have noticed massive thick structural elements and members, right? So if you split up the segmental bridges that those were constructed over the decades, so you can see, you can group it in a different ages that basically represents how old those structures are. So only 7% of structures were constructed for 40 years back, and then you have 24 percentages or lying in the range of 21 to 30 ages, and then 19 percentage in the range of 11 to 20 years. And you can see a significant amount of bridges were constructed in the last decade. So those were like relatively very young, which ages about 0 to 10 years. So for the current survey, the study indicates like the available post-segmental bridges are performing well. Why? Because those are relatively young. So because of that, you are not noticing the damages or deterioration in the young constructed structures, right? So however, the conclusions also made, based on the condition of the young structures. So that means you are not actually determining the condition of long term performance of such pre-stressed concrete structures. So again here, the strand corrosion becomes the major issue, and this is even more severe compared to your conventional reinforced concrete. So I'll tell you why in the coming slides. Because when you have pre-stressed, the strands are already under or stress. So in that case, that has high energy to react. So the corrosion potential is higher in such type of steel reinforcement that we use. So the chloride threshold value will be lesser for pre-tension concrete systems. For example, if you need 1 or 2% of chlorides to initiate the corrosion in conventional reinforced concrete, so that limit will be, that limit got reduced here in this case. You need less amount of chlorides to initiate the same amount of corrosion that you expect in your conventional reinforced concrete. So that is why stand corrosion becomes a major issue in pre-stressed concrete systems, and it is even more dangerous and severe than your conventional reinforced concrete systems. So we are going to look at few aspects. First is that the mechanism behind the corrosion mechanism for pre-stressed concrete systems, and what are the good practices that we can adapt so that we can minimize the initiation of corrosion in pre-stressed concrete system. Fine. So let me ask you, what is a pre-stressed concrete system?
Already stressed concrete.
So it's already stressed concrete, right? So by its the name, you can say pre-stressed concrete is already stressed concrete. Why it is already stressed?
To reduce the actual deflection caused by the load.
To reduce the actual deflection possible. Yeah, you are right. So compared to the conventional reinforced concrete, if you pre-stress the thing, so you are basically reducing the actual deflection. But what is the concept behind it? How it is being reduced?
Like
By
you provide that pre-stress one so that there will be an upward deflection. So when we provide the load, there will come to neutral form.
Yeah. So you are basically inducing pre-compression in concrete because your concrete is good in compression, weak in tension. So we are basically utilizing the good property of concrete by inducing pre-compression. So when it is taking load, the pre-compression has to be decompressed, then only it will get into tension part. Right? That is what you have meant now. So now, what are the two different types of pre-stressing that we can adapt in practice? So you are clear with the pre-stressed concept. So you are pre-stressing it basically to reduce the deflection by utilizing the compressive strength of concrete. So when you pre-stress, you are going to pre-compress the concrete, and that is going to benefit you in reducing the deflection by inducing hogging moments. What are the different types of pre-stressing that we can do? Pre-tensioning and post-tensioning, right? So are you aware of pre-tensioning and post-tensioning?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
All right. So here is a good example which illustrates the concept of pre-stressing, right? So it is very difficult to take such huge number of books in a vertical manner. So that is a case you can consider for conventional reinforced concrete, right? So when you have books stacked in horizontal in this way and you just compress it in sideways, that is going to induce pre-compression there. So because of that compressive effect, you are able to take the loads on top of this. So this was the illustration given by Professor Mangel, who was a professor in University of Ghent in Belgium. So it pretty much clears the concept of pre-stressing, how it helps you to take more loads compared to the conventional rebar. So basically, you are going to induce the pre-compression, so that pre-compression helps you to take more loads. But how are you going to induce the pre-compression? So for that we have two types of system. So one is that basically here you are going to stress the strand. So stressing in the sense you are going to tension the strands, because steel is good in tension. So because you are stressing it, and then you are going to release the stress, right? So why you are going to release it? So while releasing it, the tension, the stress, this tension, the strand that tries to induce compression in the concrete. Let me explain in this way. So you see the system here that is shown. This is for pre-tension concrete system. So first I'll explain you what is pre-tensioning and post-tensioning. So when we say pre-tensioning, as the name indicates there, you are going to stress your strand before placing the concrete. Right. So anyway, all this pre-stressed concept involves tensioning the strand. But when are you going to tension, that determines the system that you are going to use. So you have pre-tensioning. So there strands are stressed before the concrete is cast. And then you have post-tensioning system. So where strands are stressed after concrete has hardened, right? So you can see the test, external setup that can be used for pre-tensioning it. So you have a pre-stressing bench shown in this green color, that steel frame that indicates your pre-stressing bed or pre-stressing bench, and then the black color basically indicates your pre-stressing strand, and you have a hydraulic jack that can be placed here, and that typically used to apply the required stress. So when you apply the stress in this direction, so it is going to induce tension in your steel. So now your steel strands are under tension, and you are going to pour the concrete in the beam mold or the specimen mold that you have kept. So your stand is under tension and your concrete is placed, and now your concrete is going, allowed to cure, to gain its strength. So once the concrete has gained its strength for about 60% of its target strength, what you are going to do is you are going to release the stress, this whatever stress the strand had taken, so those stress will be released. So that release can be, by cutting the strand or by releasing the locks that is there to keep the stress maintained in the strand, right? So by doing so, you know so you have tensioned the strand, and now you are going to release the tension. So while releasing it, you have concrete placed on the surface, hardened concrete, right? So you have hardened concrete here, right? So when you are releasing it now, the while you elongate the while you tension the strand, your strand has a tendency to elongate, right, depending on the stress level. And then when you release it, your strand tries to get back to its original diameter, you know because of the de-stressing effect. But what happens, you have the hardened concrete surrounding to your stand, which will not allow your stand to expand. So that basically is going to induce stress at the ends, and because of this de-stressing, all the stress will be released in this manner, and that is going to induce pre-compression in the concrete. So this is a similar mechanism in the post-tensioning as well, but the stage is different. So there you have hardened concrete, and once concrete is hardened, you will be placing. So here you provide a provision for placing the tendons and tensioning while concreting itself, and the concrete is hardened, you place the tendons in its position, and then you apply the stress level, required stress level. So here you can see the provisions for placing the tendon for stressing. So the tendon in duct or tubbing. So most of the highway bridges or flyovers are made using either one of these two types of pre-stressed system. So when, in general, when you have pre-tension, post-tension concrete systems, mostly you will see such type of segmental construction. So the construction will be like part of it will be constructed as a segments. So you can see a lot of segmental construction when you use post-tension system over the pre-tension system. So now let us. I'll just cover this point alone. No, we will just continue the class in the next class. I will stop it here, because if I start this point, then I have to cover these two also, then it will be effective.